scary stories. So, back in high school, I was a rather shy girl. This was after the recession. My family had gotten a bit tight on money. Usually I didn't eat lunch, and I had to hide that fact from the staff at school. So I studied in the library and sat outside on the field behind the school for lunch. Rarely had I ever eaten or sat in the lunchroom. As the school year went on near its end, prom was coming up. I never had enough money for a prom dress, so I always turned down any offers to go, simply because I didn't want people to know that I couldn't afford a dress, let alone the ticket to get in. Between classes, I had to walk through the cafeteria. I noticed that there was a younger boy who had always stared at me. His friends would pat his shoulder, and I read on one of their lips as they told him to ask her. The group of boys just looking and smiling, except for the nervous one simply staring at me. Anyway, I kept finding ways to sort of get past him without him noticing. Now I know this sounds mean, but I didn't know him. I couldn't afford it, and also I felt like he was dark inside. It was like every time I saw him, all I saw was gray smoke around him, and there was a really uneasy feeling about him. Anyway, prom happened, and I lived right down the street from the high school, so I could hear the music and see all the kids driving down the road or walking to school in their new clothes. As I sat there looking at the lights and the kids, I decided it was stupid to just watch the event happen without me, so I made myself go to sleep. A week or so after prom, I heard another kid in school talking about something, almost whispering. Apparently, the boy that wanted to ask me out to prom, he ended up asking another girl from another school. She said yes, but when he showed up to the house, her dad didn't like him and said she shouldn't go with him. The boy then told the girl he couldn't go to prom with her because something had come up and that he wouldn't be going to prom with her. The father and the boy talked about it, and the father said that if he paid for a portion of her dress, then they could go. The kid went back to the house and cut the screen to the back door with a knife. Then he unlocked it. Her father woke up and asked him what he was doing there. The boy said, "I came to see you die." Before charging at the father with a knife and a shovel, he managed to stab her dad 7 times. Her parents subdued the kid, and he was arrested and released on a $10,000 bond. The rest is history. So that's my prom night story. Oh yeah, the dad did survive, which is great. First, a bit of context. When I was younger, from 10 years old to 15 years old, now 19 years old, I used to live in a semi-rural area, like small cities with fields around. During this time, I used to have a best friend that lived in another city, but still close enough so we can go to each other's houses. Indeed, there was a really long road that crossed both of our cities, and another one further, and we both lived really close to that road. We used to see each other almost every day, but my friend Alan and I never texted each other, because even if I was a lot into social media and stuff, he was the kind of guy that almost never used his phone, so he ended up losing his phone in his house and at a friend's house a lot. So the only time we texted each other, it was to warn the other one if we weren't able to meet that day. If no one sent anything in the morning or the day before, it meant that we will see each other later that day. If the weather wasn't good enough to stay outside, I used to go to his house. The path I used to take to go to his house was something like 1.5 kilometers, I think. It was the only possible way because the cities were separated by a river, so we had to pass the bridge to go from city to city. I will describe the path so I can imagine it. First, there was a lot of houses, then only a few houses, and a chemical factory on the other side of the road, then nothing but trees from one side, and still the factory from the other side. Then the bridge that is not really long because it's not a big river. On my side, there is 2 paths that go on both shores of the river where few people used to walk or fish. After that bridge, there is nothing but trees until the end, where there is a warehouse in the street where Alan lives. I took this path around 1,000 times with him, or my parents, or on my way, so even though there is a lot of people walking there, it never made me nervous to walk there, even when it started to get dark. But as I have said earlier, this road connects to 3 cities, so usually there is some vehicles driving there. One day, however, something went wrong. This story takes place when I was 13 years old. I was headed to Alan's house as usual when I reached the area with less houses. A white van that was coming from behind me slowed down next to me, with the window open. Several times before, lost drivers has asked me or my family or friends information to go somewhere, so it didn't really surprise me, and I just watched the man inside the van. I'm not really sure anymore how he looked. I just remember that he was in his 30s or 40s, bald, with no mustache, no beard. He has a kind of creepy smile, but I didn't pay attention to that and just waited for him to say something as I kept walking slowly. Since I was walking, he moved too, at my pace, so we can talk. "Hello," he said finally. I've said hello too. Still waiting for a question. "Where are you going?" he asked, smiling and staring at me. I frowned because, of course, this wasn't the type of question I was waiting for. At this point, I wasn't scared yet, just confused. I asked him why he wants to know that, to which he replied, "If you have nothing to do, I can take you for a ride. Would you like that?" This started to get really weird, and I really wanted him to leave because I started to get scared. I chose to lie, thinking he would leave me alone if he knows that someone is waiting for me. So I've said, "I can't, I'm going back home, and my parents are waiting for me." But of course he didn't leave. He continued to smile and stare at me, driving at my pace. He just said, "It's okay, we can just do a small drive then." I knew at this point that this man was trying to kidnap me, or worse, but I managed to stay calm, and I didn't show any fear. I insisted, "No, but really, I can't. I'm already late. I have to hurry up." But it seemed that he really wanted to do whatever he was planning to me, and replied, "Oh, then I will drive you home. I don't want you to get scolded, but for that, you have to give me a kiss." He then leaned closer to the window and formed a kiss with his mouth, waiting for me to kiss him. At this point, we were really close to the bridge, which means that Alan's house was still far. For some reason, I didn't think to just turn around and run for my life to my house or to the factory. So I just kept walking and refused his offer. Of course, he insisted, "Come on, just one kiss, right there." I remember wishing that a car or someone would show up to help me, but the road was deserted this day. He insisted a few more times, and I kept saying no, getting more scared every time. Eventually, once we were crossing the bridge, an idea crossed my mind, which I did not mention earlier. On the second shore, there is a house. It's where the person that I take care of's family usually lived. Usually no vehicles is allowed to go down that shore, so I thought he wouldn't follow me if I go there. So I've said, "No, not really, I don't need you. My home is right there," and quickly turned on the right to go home. However, that was only a half-smart move, because except the house, there is nothing but trees and water for almost 3 kilometers. So if there was no one in the house or on the shore, I would have been at his mercy. Like what if he waited on the bridge and saw that no one opened the door? He could just have gone down there and taken me. Hopefully there was a man walking with his dog right next to the house. I ran to him and immediately crouched in front of the dog to pet it, trying to act like he was my dad or something. Obviously the man was really confused, so I proceeded to explain the whole thing to him. But it turns out he didn't give a shit and walked away before I finished my story. I watched him leave and noticed that the van was not there anymore. I was relieved, but didn't want to go back on the road because I was scared that he was hiding just a bit further, waiting for me. I stayed next to the house for 2 to 3 minutes, trying to find out what to do now, when a white van crossed the bridge again, slowly. When I saw it, I got terrified, thinking it was him again. It was a very common-looking van, with no distinction, so I can't tell if it was really him or not. But they were driving really, really slow, like they were looking for something. I froze for a few seconds, and then ran for my life along the shore for a very long time before jumping into the forest. I ran something like 2 kilometers, and to be honest, I didn't think I was able to run this much. When I finally arrived at Alan's house, it took me about 10 minutes to catch my breath. I was shaking and totally exhausted after running this much. I don't remember why, but instead of knocking on his door, I called him on the phone. Guess what? That was one of the rare days in the year when he wasn't home, but he forgot to text me in the morning. I stayed next to his house for 2 hours. I was too scared to go back home because I thought he was still on the road, but also I didn't want to call my parents because I was scared that they may forbid me to going to Alan's house alone. I eventually came back home, but instead of using the same path, I went through the forest and walked along the shore for a long time seeking for another bridge. My parents still don't know about this story. Creepy man that wants to kiss 13-year-old girls. Let's not meet again. My parents are divorced, and because of this, I visit my dad, stepmom, and younger brother every other weekend. I do not enjoy going to my dad's house, not because I don't enjoy his company or anything of the sort, but because of an incident that occurred nearly 2 years ago. My dad doesn't live in the ghetto like most other stories claim. He lives in a trailer park, truly living up to the standard of Oklahoma living. It's not uncommon for people addicted to meth to live in these places for a couple of weeks before they are evicted or arrested. It was my weekend to go to my dad's house. I got there, and we visited and ate dinner and such as families do. My dad and stepmom had already put my baby brother to bed, and they had went to sleep themselves. After about 30 or so minutes, I also fell asleep on the couch in the living room. They are not in the financial situation to set up a room for me on my own. I wake up to the sound of loud banging on the paper-thin door of the trailer house. I didn't freak out at this point due to the groggy stupor just waking up had put upon me, as if it were the middle of the Sunday afternoon and I had gotten a polite knock on the door from a neighbor to ask to borrow sugar for their cake. I started to answer the door. I fumbled with the lock, but luckily I didn't have the function to even close the unblocking of the 3 locks they have. I finally fully woke up and realized what the hell it was I was doing. I started to panic because I heard the voice of a man who sounded like a stereotypical redneck say, "I know you were in there. Now let me in." I suppose he knew I was inside because he heard me messing with the locks. I didn't dare say anything back to the deranged man on the other side of the weak door that had surprisingly not gave in from his relentless pounding on it. After he said this, he started to kick the door. I didn't piece that together at the time because all I heard was loud thuds slamming against the door. But later, I found out that he had used the guardrail on the porch as leverage to position himself between the railing and our front door, kicking it. My reasoning for knowing that is because the next day, the flimsy railing was bowed outward right in front of the door, where he had leaned back on it. His screams and attempts to bust through the door somehow did not manage to wake up either my dad or stepmom, so I bolted to their room and burst in and almost hesitated to wake them up in fear I would somehow get in trouble for this. The man's screams grow louder and louder, and he said something about how he deeply missed me. This still tends to freak me out, thinking about what he said. How could the man miss me if he didn't know me? I knew that I sure as hell didn't know him,
by the sound of his voice. I woke up my parents. They jumped out of bed after seeing the horror on my face and hearing the wails of the man outside. They both ran to the front door and yelled from the other side of the cardboard cutout that kept this creeper from doing God knows what, and yelling, "Get away, we are calling the police." The man yelled back, but in pain, as if it sounded like he had fallen down our stairs. He did. After we heard the agony-filled screech, we heard a screech of a different kind as he peeled out of our driveway, and what sounded like a truck of some sort. My dad opened the door to see if he could catch his license plate. Of course, he couldn't, as the creepy-ass guy had already hightailed it out of there, and it was the middle of the night. As most criminals of his caliber were, this man was clearly a coward. He had fled at only the sound of another adult's voice. I'm not complaining, though. I was glad this guy was gone. Clearly, he was out of his mind or dealing with some sort of substance abuse, if not both. Nothing like this has ever happened at their house again. That doesn't mean that it's not unnerving to be there and try to sleep in their living room, because believe me, it is. The experience wouldn't have been quite as scary if it weren't for him saying that he missed me. That always stayed with me. I'm not sure what he meant by that or what his motive was for trying to break in, but I think I'm better off not knowing. It scares me to think that he could show back up there at any time, not just because he could hurt me while I visit, but he could also hurt my baby brother, who is only a couple of years old. It also scares me to think that if it wasn't for all of the locks put on the door by my dad being too cautious, I could have let the psycho into the house. As I said before, he hasn't came back, and I hope he doesn't. So, creepy guy who tried to break into my dad's house because you missed me, let's not meet again.